So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the May Outdoor Florida webinar presented by the Office of Greenways and Trails. So my name is Doug Alderson, and today I'm happy that we're featuring guest speaker Mickey Thomason, who is the manager of the Cross Florida Greenway, and he's been with the Greenway since its inception in 1994. So he'll describe some of the history that he knows very well, and along with the many recreation opportunities along its path. With more than 3.3 million visitors annually, last year the Greenway had the largest estimated local economic impact of any unit within the Florida State Park system at about 417 million was the estimate. So before we get into the webinar, I have a couple of reminders. At the end of the slideshow, we'll have a question and answer period. So please hold your questions until then. You can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the Q&A. And you can type in your questions as they come to you, and we'll get to the questions afterwards. And please note that this is being recorded and it will be available within a day or two on the State Parks YouTube channel. So I'd like to introduce Mickey. So Mickey graduated with a BS degree in Parks and Recreation from the University of Florida in 1990, and he has been a Parks and Recreation professional since 1994. First with DEP's Office of Greenways and Trails, we used to manage the Greenway, and now the Florida Park Service. Mickey has also attended graduate level courses in fisheries management, limnology, and aquatic plant sciences at UF. Mickey was one of the first employees hired on the Cross Florida Greenway when it was created out of the former Cross Florida Barge Canal project in 1994. And he has worked in numerous positions during his career, from OPS Ranger to his current position as park manager for over the 75,000 plus acre Cross Florida Greenway. Mickey has a diverse range of experience that he has accrued over the 30 plus years of managing numerous greenways and trails, corridors, and properties throughout the state. He has been married to his lovely wife, Michelle, for more than 22 years, and their wonderful daughter, Elizabeth, is currently attending the University of Florida. They all live in Gainesville. So thank you again, Mickey, for taking the time to speak to us. He is ending up his career. He's retiring soon, so we're glad to get him before he retires. So I'm going to turn it over to Mickey and look forward to this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it very much. So yeah, as Doug said, we're going to talk about the Greenway and some of its history. I feel very fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time. Having at that time in the early 90s, having graduated UF a few years before, as the Greenway was starting out from the Barge Canal project. So we'll get rolling here with the slideshow and go through some of the history. First off, as Doug said, I started out my career with the Office of Greenways and Trails as part of DEP, and which was kind of a nascent agency at the time, very small, that really evolved out of the former Canal Authority that was the state liaison with the federal government and the Corps of Engineers on the Barge Canal project. And then in 2011, there was a reorg within DEP, and we were merged into the Florida Park Service and have been with them since that time for the last 13 years roughly. And so you see here the respective mission statements of the two different organizations within DEP. Okay, getting into some of the history, the lands and waters that initially were assessed and looked at as far as finding a canal route or a water route across the state. Obviously, we had the native residents of this north central part of Florida that were already here. And then you had the arrival of the Spaniards, 1511, Ponce de Leon. They're in St. Augustine, founded the oldest continually occupied settlement in the United States. And then history research that happened that led to the Ditch of Dreams book about the canal project's history. They were the ones who discovered, doing all that research about Pedro Menendez and King Philip II of Spain, writing in journals and correspondence back and forth about trying to find a water route across the Florida Peninsula. to avoid having to, circumnavigate the whole coastline to the south and some of the hazards it posed to navigation. And then it wasn't until the early 1820s, back around the time before the Second Seminole War, where Congress authorized actual studies of various route options for a canal waterway across the peninsula. And then you see in 1855 when the first route potential connecting the Withlacoochee River, the southern Withlacoochee, because we got two Withlacoochees, as I know Doug knows, here in Florida, and the southern Withlacoochee and the Ocklawaha as a potential route. So here are some drawings that depict kind of very simplistically the route of a potential canal or waterway across the Upper Peninsula. And you can see, the various iterations there and how they showed the intercoastal waterway in the black and white. In the upper right part of the screen shows the intercoastal along the Atlantic seaboard. And then you've also got the Gulf Intercoastal and the missing link kind of in the Big Bend part of Florida, between like Anclote Key, Tampa Bay area, and then up through over towards New Orleans. So here's a map that shows, an older map that shows kind of some of the original lands of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, after lands were acquired in the 1930s and 1960s to build first a sea level canal, ship canal, and then the later 1960s barge canal. So you can see kind of how that all lies across the Upper Florida Peninsula and how it connects to other landscape scale size conservation lands, with the largest being the Ocala National Forest at almost 400,000 acres on the eastern end of the Greenway, Silver Springs State Park, which is right across the street from our main field office that I'm located in, where the barge canal, it was going to be the main building for the barge canal to be managed out of. And then going westward, Ross Prairie State Forest. Since the time this map was made, there's other water management district lands around Silver Springs and other state forests at Indian Lake. So there's even more extensive lands totaling more than well over 500,000 acres that the Greenway connects, in addition to its almost 80,000 acres. So some of the history, I borrowed this slide from Steve Knoll and co-author of Ditch of Dreams, just to show how the Ocklawaha River was one of Florida's original, or was the original, tourist attraction. People coming on paddle boats to ply the waters of the Ocklawaha River. Famous authors and music writers, composers made these travels. Ulysses S. Grant did the trip. And one of the big draws was coming up the Ocklawaha River from Palatka to St. John's through the shallow, winding waters of the Ocklawaha, and ending up at Silver Spring at the head spring of Silver River. So during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, it ended up they wanted to put people to work due to lack of jobs and the economic hardships that were going on. And so actually Congress funded, and Franklin Roosevelt called and blew up a pile of dirt from his home in Hyde Park, New York, down in Ocala, but they started working on a sea level canal in the 1930s. In 1935, the federal government budgeted $5 million for the project, and they created a camp town north of Santos, kind of in the center of the Greenway, along 441. And so they ended up at the peak having about 8,000 people working on the canal project, on the sea level canal. And again, it was going to be for ships. So a sea level canal going all the way from the Gulf to the St. Johns River. Pretty ambitious. And you can still see today out here, there's these long rectangular dark areas on the screen. This is west of I-75 and the land bridge, but those diggings, as we call them, those are all historic ship canal diggings, cultural resources from the 1930s sea level canal project. So pretty cool that one of the neater features on the uplands of the Greenway that you've got these diggings that were done back in the 1930s and the Great Depression, that were bare ground almost 90 years ago. And this is a view from a helicopter from back in 2011, and you can see the digging here in the foreground or the center, and then there's another one further out in the upper part of the screen. So after the plug got pulled by Congress on the sea level canal, after it was only funded for 1 year, it ended up, they killed the project by 1 vote. And there were concerns of saltwater intrusion into the aquifer with the sea level canal. You also had the railroads and the South Florida Port authorities opposed or lobbying against the project because of the competition it was going to bring about. So, and it ended up, World War II got started in the early 1940s, and German U-boats were operating off the eastern seaboard and ended up sinking a ship called the Gulf America, an oil tanker, 5 miles off the beach in Jacksonville. And you could see the ship burning from the beaches, and that helped the canal boosters, the people who wanted to see a canal built, rallying for, we need this canal for national defense. So it ended up in 1942 during the war that Congress changed the project from a 30-foot deep sea level ship canal to the minimum 12-foot draft lock and dam barge canal project that then would help mitigate some of those saltwater intrusion concerns. Of course, there were no funds available really for the canal effort during the war effort in World War II. And so no funding was available. They merely changed the project as far as, what type of canal or waterway it was going to be. And then you can see here some of the different waterways for commercial interests and recreational interests and how all that's tied together. And then you can see that missing link there in the Panhandle, Big Bend area, I should say, with the green dots along that area, the northwest coast. Okay, and here's a map kind of depicting how the barge canal was going to operate. Starting over at the Gulf end at Yankeetown, you're at sea level, obviously, with the Gulf of Mexico there, then would lock up from sea level in the Gulf end to Inglis Lock, and then that would bring you up to about 27.5 feet above sea level through the pre-existing Lake Russo. Then there was going to be another lock that wasn't built on the east side of Dunellen that was going to raise you up to what they called the Summit Reach, which is about 50 feet above sea level, 50 to 55 feet above sea level was going to be its operating elevation. And then it was basically a big ditch at that 50 to 55 foot elevation to here by Silver Springs, near where my office is, the main office for the Greenway. And then you were going to lock down from that 55 foot elevation to about 40 feet through a reservoir that was going to be flooded south of Eureka and in between Silver Springs and Rodman Reservoir in the St. Johns River. And then there was another lock and dam that were actually built at Eureka. They did everything but plug the river there, and that was going to flood about an 18,000 acre reservoir, about twice the size of Rodman. But the project was stopped before it got to that point. And then Rodman Reservoir, that's there, and a long-standing environmental controversy regarding restoration of the Ocklawaha River and the potential breaching of the dam that's basically been going on ever since the dam was built. The river was plugged and flooded back in late 1968. So that's been going on for over 55 years that Rodman's been there. And the controversy continues to this day. And then you had where you would go through Buckman Lock on the east end of Rodman and then go out a short distance, about 1.5 miles to the St. Johns River. And that was how you completed the trip back and forth as it was originally intended. So here's a satellite image. You can see there's Lake Russo that was flooded originally in the early 1900s for hydroelectric power. It's about a 4,000 acre reservoir. And then you can see kind of where those diggings were in this kind of west central part of the greenway. And it goes all the way up and faintly follows around and wraps around the northwestern part of the Ocala National Forest and out to the St. Johns. But it's something our original director, Fred Ayer, back when I was hired, used to like to say that you could see the greenway from outer space from satellite photos. This is actually when the Barge Canal project was started. Kennedy is the one, John F. Kennedy, who had promised he would get the canal funded if the Democratic Party in Florida would support him for his run for the presidency. He made good on that, although he was assassinated briefly, or was assassinated before the project got started, but the funding had been allocated just before he was assassinated. And so it ended up, Lyndon Johnson flew in to Palatka and Air Force One on a cold, rainy day. And at Road Heavers Boys Ranch, which is just south of the canal project in Buckman Lock on the east end of the project, in February of '64, Lyndon Johnson came there. They blew up a pile of dirt to get the project started, and on it went. I talked to a elderly gentleman years ago who was an AP photographer at the time, who said he was at that event and said what a miserable day it was and how it was an omen of what was to come. And so in earnest, they began working on the Barge Canal project on both ends as the funding was available. And you can see here different things that were going on. They were working on both the east and west ends simultaneously, and digging the canal and starting to build locks on either end. And so they didn't waste any time. They got going as fast as they could. And it was a big deal, of course. It's a huge public works project. And I think the budget back then was estimated to be like $165 million. And they only got about a third of the way done before it was later stopped. But, you know, you had marquees like this at the Holiday Inn welcoming the Barge Canal. So a lot of pomp and circumstance, as well as political machinations on both sides. This is a machine called the Crawler Crusher. It was designed and built by a gentleman out of Leesburg, Mr. F. Brown Gregg, fascinating gentleman who has a biography that was written about him. But he was dyslexic, but like a savant when it came to mechanical equipment. And he kept an easel near his bed and would wake up, you know, sometimes in the middle of the night and start drawing these machines that would pop into his head. And when the Corps of Engineers put out the bid for clearing land in preparation for flooding Rodman Reservoir, he woke up in the middle of the night and started designing this machine that ends up being one of the largest tracked vehicles ever built. And you can see the size of it. They had to bring it in on multiple semis. It has 2 D8 Caterpillar engines in it, and it's just a massive, massive machine. And here's another picture of it in black and white. There's actually videos of it on YouTube if you type in Crawler Crusher. And there's also a really cool tracked vehicle website that has some more detailed information on the machine and the history of the canal projects. But this push bar that's on the front of it wasn't originally on it, but got added later. And this machine probably ended up being one of the best things for the people who started fighting to oppose the canal's construction and completion, because just the video of this massive machine going through thousands of acres of river floodplain forest in the Putnam County area, Putnam and Marion counties, and just crushing these, you know, beautiful cypress forests and stuff into the mud, probably caused more ill will and raised more hackles to fight the Barge Canal than about anything else. And so you had Marjorie Harris Carr, who was typified back then as a housewife from Micanopy. She had a master's in biology and 5 kids, and the wife of now very famous ecologist and UF professor Archie Carr. And Marjorie had fought some battles prior to the barge canal involving the interstate and where it went through in Micanopy, where they had property, and also saving Lake Alice on the campus of UF that was going to be filled in for development. And so she had kind of learned some bumps and bruises from fighting other environmental battles in the past. But in the late 1960s, she helped rally and organize a lot of brain power from UF and other places to help bring together the resources to oppose the barge canal project and try to stop it. She ended up being successful in that effort. And in 1971, President Richard Nixon ended up, and she used to be able to pick up the phone and call Richard Nixon at the zenith of her power. But Richard Nixon ended up issuing an executive order in January of 1971, ceasing all activity on the barge canal, again, when it was about a third of the way through. And so that's what stopped it. There were later court battles and litigation on various points, including the State Canal Authority suing Nixon as a sitting president, asserting that he did not have the authority to stop the project, that only Congress did. And actually, the state was successful in that lawsuit against the sitting president, but the political momentum and winds had switched. The National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, had been also passed in 1969. And the barge canal was one of the first projects to have environmental impact statements done that looked at all the different aspects of the project, economic feasibility, impacts to the environment, and a whole suite of different things that were looked at during the different EISs that were done by various groups and agencies. This is the Ditch of Dreams book that I mentioned earlier. This ended up coming out of the Department of Environmental Protection, OGT, hired UF to do a second management plan when it was coming due for the Greenway in the mid-90s. And this ended up evolving into some history research was one facet of that. And Steve Knoll and Dave Tegeter, Dr. Knoll is a history professor at UF, and Dr. Tegeter is a history professor at Santa Fe College. And so we worked with them back then, and they went and traveled to various presidential libraries and, where all these historical documents are housed regarding the canal's history. And they wrote this book that came out later as an iteration of the research project UF did for the management plan in the mid-90s. And this book won some awards for Florida history as well as Southeastern history. Okay, so here's a map showing the whole Florida State Park system, and you can see the Greenway as it stretches across here and all the other park units in the state back when this map was produced. So you can see the size and shape of it. It's a very unusual size and shape for a park, being on average a mile wide and 110 miles long and stretching from the Gulf Coast to the St. Johns River. It's very different than a typical park. So managing the Greenway, a lot of the different things we do, it has an incredible diversity to it. And you can see here in the upper left, Santos, which is famous for mountain biking, is considered one of, if not the premier mountain biking destination in Florida and the Southeast. And of course, with our climate, people can come down here and ride mountain bikes year round. And in the wintertime, when people are all snowbound and more traditional mountain biking destinations, Santos is at its optimum. And then we've got the land bridge with the Florida Trail icon here. The Greenway is blessed to have about 43 miles of the Florida National Scenic Trail located across it. What's known as the Western Connector down here by Silver Springs that runs from the Ocala National Forest westward over to the Dunellen area where it hooks into the Withlacoochee State Trail and then goes south from there. But we have about 43 miles of the whole statewide 1,400 mile Florida National Scenic Trail on the Greenway. And Marshall Swamp Trail is actually located right here behind our office. And you've got the substation down there at 441. That large concrete structure you see in that photo in the lower right is actually bridge stanchions that were being poured and built just as the sea level canal project in the 1930s was being stopped. And what the Ditch of Dreams authors told me was that as they had already done all the forms and everything, and they were told the project was being stopped and to quit working on the sea level canal project, but the foreman and crews at the time were like, well, we've already got the forms up, let's go ahead and pour them. So we have there's 4 of these big bridge pillars behind the sheriff's office in the middle of 441, what we call the Island Trail, because it's like an island median strip. And you see these in the woods there along the northbound lanes of 441 in Santos area. And especially in the wintertime when the tree foliage is thinnest, they're pretty easily seen, and there are periodically inquiries to the local newspaper wanting to know what those are and how they got there. And then, of course, some other stuff, Vortex, that has different mountain bike features and extreme terrain, an old mining quarry in Santos area, and fishing pier over on the east end of the Greenway. So this shows the Florida National Scenic Trail and that western connector that I was mentioning earlier, coming over and then getting onto the Withlacoochee State Trail. We've been very fortunate through our partnerships with so many people, but FDOT a couple of years ago, a little over 2 years ago, we had the grand opening of a tunnel under US 441 on the south side of Dunnellon, northern Citrus County. And it's actually where our Dunnellon Trail, that's a couple miles long with a really nice bridge over the Withlacoochee, was connected to the Withlacoochee State Trail via this tunnel and about 1 mile of additional paved trail from that tunnel over to the north end of the Withlacoochee. And that's a connection that had been on everybody's trail planning books for decades before it actually happened. But kudos to DOT for getting that one done. And they funded so many of the great projects that the Greenway has benefited from. And speaking of connections, here's an idea of what the future holds with the Heart of Florida Loop and different trails, some that are already exist and segments that are being connected every day. And you can see up here in the upper left of the screen, you've got Silver Springs area here by the office I'm at, and then basically the Greenway running to the southwest and west over to Dunnellon, kind of forming this northwestern leg of the Heart of Florida Loop. And then the Withlacoochee State Trail running south through Inverness and on down, and just how all this will get connected around these large metropolitan areas and be a huge draw for more extended visitation and cycling adventures. Pretty cool. Again, talking about partners, got all these here, and there's more than even what I've got on here, and we've been so blessed to work with all these different agencies over the years and decades. I've been here too long. So, but this just shows you what it takes to make all this work, of working with all these partners as well as local governments. And, but it's very rewarding to see from when these programs were in their infancy, how far we've come over the last 30 plus years, and seeing also what the future holds. It's really exciting, and the future looks very bright in that regard. One of the things on the Greenway with the different user group trails, we're fortunate enough to have pretty much, individual user type trails in a lot of places. We do have to bottleneck them at certain places where we have bridges or tunnels, but just having trail courtesy and etiquette, as Doug said, the Greenway is fortunate enough to have 3.3+ million estimated visitors based on traffic counters we have at the different designated access points. And So it can get busy out there at times, especially during the cooler months and when things are happening and we have a lot of special events on the Greenway. So we try to promote trail etiquette and everybody, trying to be courteous to each other, and so everybody has a good time out there. Because the last thing you want is to get into some kind of row with somebody when you're out there trying to unwind and have some quality time in the woods. In addition to the recreational management we do, natural resource management is a big focus of ours. And you can see we've got a lot more than is shown on this slide, but these are some of the most important species we have on the Greenway. The scrub jays, we have about 1,000 acres of scrub restoration area now, directly on the west side of I-75, north and south of the land bridge, and the digging that's right there directly west of the interstate. And been very successful with that. One of our ES2s, Lori Dolan, works directly with the jays and has been for decades. And it's one of the big success stories as far as scrub jay habitat restoration. And I think we have now over 140 birds in that 1,000 acres. And they go out every year and band them. You can see the little bands around the legs there by the feet, so that they're able to identify birds that come from different managed areas. And then the long-spurred mint down there in the lower left is a very unique plant, globally imperiled. And we have, we're the only conservation land, the Greenway is, that has that plant on it in the world. So it's big responsibility. And ES2 Adele Mills is the one who works with the listed plants and doing a great job. We've had, because of some of the scrub restoration and other areas where we've either gone in with fire and or mechanical treatments and seen increased populations and the dispersal of the mint, we're finding it in places that it never existed before. So we're guardedly optimistic on keeping that going. Prescribed burning is another part of our natural resource management that we do. The Greenway has about 25,000 fire type acres out of the 80 or so thousand total. And so we go in and do these prescribed burns as much as we can. A lot of training, a lot very weather dependent. And with some of the wildland urban interface we've got, you've got to be very careful. And typically in some of these more urbanized areas, it's hard to do, if not impossible, more than 100 acres at a time. And areas like where the scrub jays and the mint are next to the interstate and the land bridge, because of I-75, you're lucky if you can do 15 or 20 acres at a time. Because of smoke management, that's the biggest concern, and trying to keep smoke off of roads, out of neighborhoods, schools, airports, hospitals. There's a lot of different concerns, and you've got to be very careful about where that smoke goes when you're doing these burns, and that's for a day or two after the burn's over. Mentioned the Florida National Scenic Trail earlier, and you can see the blaze that they use all over the state. The main orange blaze for the main through trail, and then there's blue blazes they use where it goes out on side trails. And the mountain bike trails, again, extremely popular. We're very fortunate to have our partner, the Ocala Mountain Bike Association, that's all volunteers who do Take a Kid Mountain Biking Day. That's the event you see here kind of in the middle, the main picture in here. And where it's through the International Mountain Bike Association, where they basically work to get kids out on mountain bikes and get them some exposure and fun out in the woods, get them away from the TV and the video games and the computers. So very popular activities. And then equestrian trails, the Greenway has some of the best in the state, is what everybody tells me. And even a lady from Colorado who was writing for, I believe it was Horse and Pony magazine many years ago, came here to visit us, and she was from Colorado. And I asked her during the trip as we're going around, and she's taking pictures and looking at our horse trails. And I was like, well, who has the best trails in the country? And as far as horse trails go, and she stopped and she looked at me and she goes, honestly, I think you all do. And I was kind of shocked to hear that from somebody coming from out west. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, basically because the trails out west, they're sharing them with motorized users, with, it's everybody's on the same trails together. And you don't have the luxury of segregating these different user groups as much as possible. So she was very complimentary about the equestrian trails we got here. And of course, the central part of the Greenway is in Marion County, the world capital of the horse. So it's definitely horse country around here in Marion County, and you got a very strong equestrian contingent who do great work volunteering, raising funds to help support the trails and maintaining the trails. And we work with a couple different groups with Sun Country Trailblazers, and we have a Greenway Equestrians group. So we're very fortunate to have them to work with as volunteer organizations, as well as others here all across the Greenway. Water-based recreation, we got a lot of that too. You can see on the far left, we've got Outward Bound going through one of the locks. And I used to work when I was assistant manager on the west end over at Inglis. And that lock was operational in the late 90s. We used to lock Outward Bound through. They were one of our best customers, in fact. And then you see canoeing there at the top of the screen on the Ocklawaha River. And boating there at Rodman Campground, the pontoon boat, and people bank fishing there below the dam at Rodman Kirkpatrick. And they do the same thing. There's also a lot of bank fishing opportunities over at Inglis on the west end. So that's one of the benefits of some of the canal project works, is providing a lot of really high quality bank fishing opportunities. And as I was talking about the etiquette on the trails earlier, you can see this is some more of the information we put out to try to keep people safe and have them all get along, and so everybody has a quality experience out there and fun. And one of the things that's come about in the last several years is the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And this is their original expedition poster when that first started, and the political traction and funding and political momentum they have been able to get for the Wildlife Corridor is really great to see, and actually kind of takes to the next level early days of the Office of Greenways and Trails with the Greenways Ecological Network mapping that was done working with UF, and basically looking at areas of development with the rapid development of Florida and growth we're experiencing and have been experiencing for the last 50, 60 years, that basically finding the areas most prone to that explosive growth, working to preserve or restore ecological connectivity in those areas so that to mitigate habitat fragmentation for various species that need a lot of room to roam around, and for genetic dispersal and population survival. A lot of that started early on with the panther, that's become, I guess, the focal animal of the wildlife corridor because of their needs for range and how much habitat they need. And so it's really cool to see how that's become so popular, because this is the land bridge when it was under construction in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was very gratifying to be involved with that project. My predecessor, Dave Bowman, who was a huge mentor to me and was the first manager of the Greenway and who hired me back in 1994. Dave and I got to work with the design teams that were doing the design of the bridge. It was a consulting firm up in Tallahassee that did the structural parts. And then you had landscape architecture firm, I believe out of Orlando or South Florida. Forrest Michael did the landscape component of the project. And so this kind of shows you what it looked like early on, and with native vegetation, and the field stone the walls are made out of is from the local Ocala, Marion County area. Just a really cool project. And again, very fortunate to be involved with that. But this was, kind of the forerunner of the wildlife corridor ideas, and having a bridge over the interstate for trail and wildlife connectivity for the Greenway. And there it is, once it was completed in the early 2000s. and it was first of its kind at the time, and now there are many more like it being built all over the country. And there were some that we looked at as the design was being done on the land bridge. But since the bridge got done, we've had additional connectivity features built on the Greenway for both trails and wildlife. And so here's one that was the most recently built. That's at County Road 484, a couple of miles east of State Road 200. And this one was built again with funding through DOT, working with Marion County's engineering department. And basically, they built a temporary road, then around the construction site, then placed this in the ground, and then came back and put the road back and removed the temporary road. We've done this several times. I think we have 6 of these tunnels now, in addition to the land bridge. So pretty cool to see these going up. And I've talked to some of the Wildlife Corridor and Wildlife Corridor Foundation people, and I don't think anybody else in the state's got as many connectivity features as the Greenway does that I'm aware of. So, you know, and we've tried to maintain some wildlife cameras on those to monitor the use of them by both 2-legged and 4-legged critters. So this is actually one out by the horse park on the west side of County Road 475A. And this was the grand opening of the land bridge back in the early 2000s. I see some people there I recognize, but I remember there was a band there that day, and they did a special composition for a song about the Greenway, and it was a pretty cool day. We had the Secretary of DEP at the time, David Strews, there, as well as DOT Secretary, I believe his name was Mr. Barry, and they're on a Saturday to do the big ribbon cutting and unveiling of the land bridge for everybody. Here's this was the first good bear shot we got of a bear there at the land bridge approach slopes, and it's a big one. And this was really exciting for us to see this bear. It was quite a few years ago, probably going back close to 15 years ago, but it was really cool to see that, because there had been a lot of conjecture in the past by people, some who used to question whether we would ever have these kind of you know, large mammals traversing across the bridge and over the interstate. So again, very gratifying to see that and see it be as successful as it has been. Here's a young buck right here at the land bridge, obviously before the paved trail from Santos to the east side of State Road 200 was constructed about 5-6 years ago. But you could see this deer starting to go across, and you can see one of our wildlife cams there in the right side of the screen. This is a great photo. This isn't from any of our wildlife underpasses or anything, but this was actually sent to us several years ago by a woman who was out riding on the mountain bike trails west of the interstate, and she contacted the office and sent us this picture, but she told us she was on one of the mountain bike single track trails through that area. And as she came around a curve, all of a sudden this bear was like right there off the side of the trail and kind of startled her. And actually, if you look down between its legs, you can see their smaller paws, where this is actually a female bear with who had a cub or two with her, and I guess was teaching them how to get grubs and bugs, peeling back the bark off of fallen trees that are decaying. Here's speaking of charismatic megafauna, a bobcat here at the bridge getting ready to cross. And in addition to stuff that we have these pictures of, some of our longtime volunteers, Ken Smith, who was the original person who laid out the Florida Trail Western Connector from basically Silver Springs area over to Dunellen. Ken, early on after the bridge was built, told us about seeing an indigo snake crawling across the bridge. So that was really cool to hear too, even though we don't have a photo of it. So this, getting near the end here, and I wanted to show this because we're pretty excited that we recently submitted a SunTrail application to DOT because they're getting ready to add 1 lane each for the north and southbound lanes of I-75 where it crosses the Greenway here in Marion County. And so that's going to use all the available space under the existing land bridge. And also with the paving, like I said earlier, 5+ years ago, of the paved trail across the land bridge, we've been advocating for a future larger, expanded and enhanced land bridge. And so this is basically a depiction of what we think something like that could look like. And they are building, as I said, more of these in other parts of the country. I know there's one in California being worked on right now. I read an article recently that's a $90 million project. And I know the land bridge, when it was built, again at the turn of the millennium, was about a $3.6 million project, including all the design and permitting elements. So, of course, costs have gone up, but we're really excited to see what the future holds. And even though I won't be working here after the end of this month, I will certainly be keeping an eye and an ear out to see how all this evolves. Well, that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I guess we'll get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mickey, and hope that inspires all of you to go visit the Greenway soon. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A. So go ahead and type in any questions there, but I'm going to ask a couple. Since this is Mickey's last month in the office, wanted to ask him, he's done some highlights in the slideshow, but what's the major highlight of your career on the Greenway?
Well, I think just, besides the great people I've had the pleasure to work with and the amazing volunteers who really make it all happen, I think just seeing how little we started out with on the Greenway. We had a couple of old vehicles, and there was a handful of old K cars. If anybody remembers what a K car was, it was a Chrysler product. And when they were struggling financially, and those were old core vehicles, and we had one bag phone and all that, and a handful of employees initially, and none of the facilities that are there for visitors today, or almost none of them. And so all the trailheads, campgrounds, other than Rodman Campground, was pre-existing, but it was much smaller and less developed than it is now. Just seeing all those facilities and the use, it's great to see people out there using and enjoying it, and to me, what it's all about.
Excellent. And what's the schedule for the bike trail? What's the status of the bike trail to Dunellen right now? I know there was a gap at one point.
Yeah, well, we actually have the next segment is going to be from basically where the paved trail ends, coming from Santos on the east side of 200. There's going to be a project that DOT is committed to funding through Sun Trail next fiscal year, so July of 25. That funding should become available. The county has already done the design for the segment from 200 to Pruitt, basically, other than the connector across 200, and that's being funded, and it's all going to be bid as one construction project, a little over a year from now. And then the second leg of that, from Pruitt Trailhead into Dunellen and linking to the eastern end of the Dunellen Trail, we've got an agreement that was approved by the Acquisition and Restoration Council about a year ago, and we're supposed to get about a 4-mile trail corridor donated from a private landowner via a solar farm project down there on the Withlacoochee River to get us around a single gap we have between Ocala and Dunellen. And so hopefully, if that all comes to fruition and the solar project moves forward, in about, maybe by the end of next calendar year, we should be getting that land, and then they can start working on getting the funding for the design and development and get that all linked up within the next few years.
Excellent. That ties in with the Heart of Florida loop that you were talking about as well.
Exactly. Yep.
So I see a question from Tom, and he mentions he thanks you for your wonderful work. And the widest section from Ross to Santos abruptly stops at Santos to the east. Do you know if the land was ever secured for that section of the proposed barge canal? And it seems that land that was acquired along the way that looks like now cut out of the current Greenway property is back in the hands of private entities. Was there a process for that for people to request that land acquired for the barge canal project at a point in time after the funding was stopped by the Nixon administration.
Okay. So well, thank you. And the east of the railroad tracks there at Santos and the east side of 441 is what we call the Santos Gap. And there's about a quarter to a half mile gap in the Greenway land ownership. And that there was when the ship canal was going along, they actually displaced a significant portion of the historic African American community of Santos there. And a lot of the descendants and their relatives still live there from people that were, had that happen to them directly. But we are trying to continue to work on acquiring some of those lands in Santos Gap. It's very challenging. It's a very atypical, I would say, conservation lands project, even though it's not very large acreage wise. And we're talking really to make the gap and get it completed and get it all connected up well and wide enough to make it continue to make it a good wildlife and trail corridor. I would say you're probably dealing with 10 to a dozen or so landowners, but all these parcels, just about all of them, have a house on them. So that's what makes it atypical. It's not some big chunk of just raw land. And so it's got challenges. We did do one life estate with a family that lives there just east of the railroad tracks, and they're still alive. And the way a life estate works is basically you purchase it at a reduced price. The people continue to own it, pay taxes on it until they pass or decide they want to vacate the property, and then the state will take possession of that one. And then we do own about 3 acres that runs east-west in a rectangular shape on the south side of 80th Street, where the old historic African-American church is. And we're working on a restoration project of that building. But other than that, we haven't acquired any property in there. And it's something that I've talked to the wildlife corridor people about, and to Dr. Tom Hochter, who's doing over all this GIS mapping work and statewide connectivity mapping, about what a critical project I think this is. And, because you've got this huge or mile wide swath across the state from the canal projects that's evolved into the Greenway, and we just have this one gap really at this point. And it would be great to see the department and the Division of State Lands focus on this. It's not a huge amount of money we're talking about in the scheme of land acquisition to get that gap acquired, and then work on the restoration of it. So I'm hoping we can see more work on that in the future. And I think that would be a great step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I don't see any more open questions right now. So
Okay.
anything you want to add about your retirement plans? You're going to stay involved with the Greenway in some way, or?
Well, I'm sure I will stay involved in one way or another. I am signed up to be a volunteer. And, there are prohibitions currently when you retire from state government or FRS service, Florida Retirement System. You can't work for another FRS provider or contractor for about 14 months. So we'll see what the future holds. Just after doing this for 30 years and commuting back and forth from Gainesville to Ocala or other parts, other places I've been assigned to manage in the past. Just do less driving for a while and relax and get out in the woods some, and spend more time with my family, and just kind of enjoy some of it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your service, Mickey. And we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I wanted to mention, if you haven't subscribed to this, if you're just using somebody else's link, you can sign up on our website at floridadep.gov/OGT. And next month, we will feature wildlife photographer John Schinner. He'll provide some valuable photography tips. So I know a lot of you, including myself, love to take wildlife photos on our trail. So he'll give us some great tips, and I'll take some notes as well. So if you have any feedback, just send it to our email address, or Office of Greenways and Trails at floridadep.gov. So thank you very much, Mickey, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Doug.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.